good, yeah.
All right, John. So, a person, of course, growing up here in Drumheller, been involved with radio for a number of years, been involved with 910 throughout the years. What are you going to remember most about 910 AM here in Drum?
When we were growing up, and I grew up in Midlandville there, 910 was a standard in our house. I can even remember some of the broadcasters, from being knee-high to a grasshopper. I remember George Walters doing the morning show. George Walters, that wasn't his real name. A lot of people have changed names over time. It was George Karmaniski, but he would do the morning show. Some of the other names from the past, of course, Jim Fish, as we know him around Drumheller, still around there. But one thing I remember about Fish, or Jim Fisher, is him doing the Drumheller Miners play-by-play. And that's when the Miners, they won it was the Allen Cup in 1966. And I remember as a kid listening to the Miners on radio. And it was quite fascinating, for myself, and then eventually to actually go to to the arena to see the Miners there too. I was always under the assumption, when I listened to Fish on the radio during the Miners games, that he was actually broadcasting play-by-play at the game itself. So when I went to the game and I didn't hear him on the PA, I was kind of surprised at that. But that's just the naivety of a kid at that point there too. Some of the other names I remember growing up, Bill Cameron. Bill Cameron, of course, lived in Midland, too, so I kind of knew the family quite well. He did the Ag News and the Rodeo Report, and he also did a little feature in the morning. I think it was at 6:45 when he did either a Wilf Carter or a Hank Snow feature at that, and it was quite popular at that point there, too. And another name I remember quite well is Dennis Siebel. He's in Brooks here now, but Dennis Siebel, did news and sports. And again, I was back in junior high and high school when the Falcons came along, and he would do play-by-play for the Drumheller Falcons. And so I remember him quite well at that point there. And then eventually, I think he moved off to Brooks there. And then when we got our Bandits there, I contacted Denny to see if he would do the play-by-play of the Bandits, and he did that for many, many years here too. Well, and a couple other names too. I'm going to mention from the past, and because I was a big fan of radio. I have to tell you just a funny little story, and I don't know. People often ask me, what got you interested in radio? For some reason, I must have been about 6 or 7 years old. My mom took me to that old Drumheller CJDV building. It was the 2-story. It was yellow at the time, and she took me there on a Saturday morning. And we went upstairs, and there was a band playing in there. So as a kid, I thought all the music was live, not realizing a lot of it was on records at that time. But that was sort of my first initial initiation into radio at that time. And so it took me a few years before I found out that, no, the band wasn't playing all the time at the radio station.
One thing I was gonna sneak in here, John, just because I know that on the management side too, for a number of years you looked after 910, being the manager in Brooks. At that time was Q13. So to be able to get into that aspect of the station, what was that like for you?
Well, that was real, because I had so much history there too. And then I was fortunate enough that my son Addison Petrie, was able to, broadcast on 910. And one thing about 910 is, it just had a powerful signal. Like, if you listen to the request programs in the morning, they were getting calls from all over Western Canada as far away as, a Leader and Kindersley and Swift Current. And I think that's the one big thing about, 910, the powerful signal it had. It carried all the way, from almost Banff all the way to, like I say, to Swift Current, Saskatchewan.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's kind of too bad that it's going to switch, but technology, that's the way it's worked. John, I guess so that people know, what are you up to now? I hear you might be a mayor of some city of Brooks or something.
Yeah, I actually, I was in radio for many, many years here in Brooks, and Brooks has always been connected with Drumheller in one way or another. We've always had the same owners, and as you mentioned, too, I managed the Drumheller station for a few years there, too, until Mr. Walters, got down there, too. And, so, no, I'm the mayor of Brooks here now, so that's what I'm doing now.
Anybody else you want to mention? Because I'll throw it in as I write, of course, for the story.
Yeah, just a couple other people that, because I was always interested in radio as a kid, and in the evening, 910 was a block programming. They played mostly country music during the daytime, but after 9 o'clock at night, they would have a rock feature. And I remember listening to Jerry Tom, and Jerry Tom went on to bigger and better things. I know from Drumheller, he went on to CKXL in Calgary, and then I think it was out in Vancouver. And but you could phone up and do requests. He would take your requests. It was quite fascinating as a young kid, as a 13 or 14-year-old, listening to those guys. Another one that did well there too was Gordy. He took over that evening show, and then he moved on to bigger and better things in the broadcast industry too. I just a memory of 910. A couple of things I want to point out is, in the old days, whenever there was a fire, the fire siren would go, and it would alert the whole community. And for a lot of us, and I remember my mom, going to the radio, and I started to do this afterwards too, would, make sure we tuned in to see where the fire was, just sort of out of interest in the community there too. So they would always do that. The fire siren would go, and then I think it was brought to us by an insurance company. So it's kind of neat. Some good traditional radio there.
Well, and here's a final one for you too, John. You've seen a lot of changes in radio itself, and it's kind of nice that it's still maintains that local feeling.
Yeah, I'm still an advocate of local radio there. And I know you guys do the Dragons games over there. We do the Bandits games. And you're still connected. With the local news. You still want to know what's going on in the community, and then the weather is always important too. Whether it's a snowfall warning or a tornado warning or things like that. So yeah, that's the nice thing about radio, and you can connect it to the local community too. Whether you're doing the local news or taking requests or things like that too. So that's what I always appreciated about local radio.